All right. We're at your favorite restaurant in Omaha, Gorat's. Why do you like it so much? Is it the food or the price or the combination of both?
It's the food and the price and the heritage. Four generations of the Gorat family were involved here. Pal Gorat and I went to grammar school together, and so I've known the people over the years. The steaks are great, you know, the prices are right, so.
Had lunch here earlier today. It was very good and it wasn't that expensive, and I quite enjoyed it. A lot cheaper than New York and Washington.
A lot. That's why I buy people lunch here, and then they can buy me the lunch in New York.
Oh, it's a good deal. Good arbitrage. You grew up in Omaha, but then you moved to Washington when your father became a congressman.
Right.
How did you start your business career in Washington with various pinball machines or golf businesses?
Yeah, I always like to have a couple of businesses going, and the best business we had was the pinball machine business, which was the Wilson coin-operated machine company, and that was named after the high school my partner and I went to. But we had our machines in barbershops, and the barbers always wanted to put us in machines with flippers, which were just coming in. But those machines cost $350, whereas an old obsolete machine cost $25. So we always told them we'd take it up with Mr. Wilson, the mythical Mr. Wilson. He was one tough guy, I got to tell you.
So when you graduated from high school, you weren't as interested in academics, I assume, at that time?
I was not interested.
And your high school yearbook said he's likely to be a stockbroker, but he's very good in math. Why did you go to Wharton, and why did you only stay 2 years there?
I didn't want to go to college, but my dad wanted me to go to college. And we didn't have SATs then, but he practically would have done the SATs for me. So in the truth, I always wanted to please my dad. I mean, he was a hero to me and still is. But so he kept kind of jollying me along and said, well, why don't we just fill out an application for the hell of it? And so he suggested Wharton, and I applied there, and they let me in. And after the first year, I wanted to quit and go into business, and my dad said, well, give it one more year. And so I went the second year, and I said, I still want to quit. And he said, well, you know, you've got almost enough credits. If you go to Nebraska, which I was quite willing to do, for 1 year, you can get out in 3 years. So that's what I did.
Has Wharton ever called you up and said, well, you were a half graduate, you should give us some money, or they never bother you?
So far, they haven't tried that line, but they may after they watch this.
So after that, you wanted to go to business school?
Yeah, I'd won some minor scholarship at Nebraska to go to any graduate school I wanted to, that they'd give me $500. And so I applied. My dad suggested Harvard, so I applied.
And you didn't get in?
I didn't get in. I mean, you know, it took 10 minutes for the guy near Chicago interviewed me. So I spent about 10 hours going to see him. And he looked at me and he said, forget it. And
Have you ever run into that guy again, or have you ever heard from him since?
No, he needs protection now.
So I guess Harvard doesn't come after you for money because they turned you down. But you went to Columbia Business School, and why did you go to Columbia?
Well, I was at the University of Omaha, what was then called the University of Omaha's library, in August, and I was leafing through catalogs, and I just happened to see that Columbia had Graham and Dodd as teachers, and I'd read their book, but I had no idea that they were teaching. So I wrote Dean Dodd, and I said, dear Dean Dodd, I said, I thought you guys were dead. I said, but now that I found out you're alive, I'd really like to come to Columbia if you can get me in.
So you did, I assume, pretty well at Columbia Business School?
I did okay there, yeah.
You worked for Mr. Graham and his partnership, and how did that work?
Well, it was terrific in the sense I was working for my hero, but Ben was going to retire in a couple of years, and so I was only back there about a year and a half. But every day I was excited about being able to work for him.
So what you were good at was picking stocks, according to his formula, which was to look for companies that were undervalued. Now we call it value investing. Did you realize that he had some principles that were very unique, and is that why you followed his guidance?
Well, by the time I went to work for him, I probably could have recited the words in his book better than he could have. I'd read his books multiple times, and so it was more a question of being inspired by him than it was by learning something new from him.
Why did you come back to Omaha?
I wanted to come back to Omaha. I had made many friends in New York. I had a lot of friends in New York, but we had 2 kids by that time, and I lived in White Plains. I'd take the train, and I'd take the train back, and it didn't strike me as much of a life compared to being here in Omaha. And both sets of grandparents were alive at that time, and it just, and uncles and aunts, and Omaha was a more pleasant place to live.
All right, so you buy a house here.
I rent a house.
You rented a house?
I rent a house for $175 a month.
Okay. And when did you buy your house that you're still in?
In 1958. My third child was on the way.
So you start a partnership here, and how did you raise money?
Well, David, actually, when I came back, I had about $175,000. And I thought that was all I would need to live the rest of my life. I could take care of everything. So I really planned to go to school. I thought about going to law school.
Just think how successful you could have been as a lawyer.
That's true. I've regretted it ever since.
I know. So in your first partnership, when you had people cobble together some money, how much money did you actually cobble together?
Well, we met one night in May, early in May of 1956, and there were 7 people there, aside from myself, and they put in $105,000, and I put in $100. So we started with $105,100, and I gave them a little piece of paper called the ground rules.
But then ultimately you ended that partnership, I thought.
Well, what happened was that between May of 56 and January 1st of 62, I started 10 more partnerships. I made a mistake. I had no secretary, no accountant or anything. So every time I'd buy a stock, I'd break it into 11 tickets. I'd write 11 checks. I kept 11 sets of books, filed 11 tax returns, and I did it all myself. I took delivery of all the stocks because I was worried it was other people's money, so I'd go down to the bank and have these things delivered, drafted. Finally, I got wise, and on January 1st, 62, I put all 11 of the previous partnerships together in something called Buffett Partnership. I ran that till the end of 1969, at which time I dissolved it.
You dissolved that one, but then in 1969 you started a new partnership?
No, in 1969 I mailed. By that time, we had about $105 million in the partnership, and about $70 million or so of that was in cash to be distributed, and the balance was in 3 stocks, mostly Berkshire Hathaway, that I distributed pro-rata to everybody.
Okay. And then you started buying more stocks through the vehicle Berkshire Hathaway?
Stocks and
companies.
businesses, yeah.
What would you say is the reason for your ability to do this? Is it that you studied the companies more than anybody else? You stuck to your principles? You're smarter than other people? People were just caught up with fads? You didn't get caught up with fads? What would you say is the reason for this success?
Well, the first 2 to quite an extent. We bought businesses that we thought were decent businesses at sensible prices, and we had good people to run them, but we also bought marketable securities in Berkshire. Over time, the emphasis shifted from marketable securities over to buying businesses.
What was the theory behind buying a railroad? Because people thought they were kind of fossils as businesses.
The railroad business had a bad century. They're kind of like the Chicago Cubs. Right. Everybody has a bad century now and then.
The David